Okay. Hello and welcome to the NRC breakout session on circular economy strategies. Thank you for joining us here today. My name is Marielle Etienne. I'll serve as your moderator today. I'll introduce myself and the panelists later, but before we get started, let's do a bit of housekeeping. Take a moment to introduce yourself in the chat, including your name, affiliation, role, and location, so we get to know each other a little better. Please make sure you're muted throughout the panel discussion, and we'll be taking questions throughout the session in the chat box. I will be holding a few of them for the audience Q&A at the end. And then in terms of our agenda, I'll start off by offering a little context, and then I'll introduce our panelists. And then I'll ask a series of questions, and we'll take some audience questions, and we'll wrap up with a double dose of pragmatism and blue skies visioning. And time allowing, we'll provide you with some takeaway resources. So our vision for the session was to go beyond the usual PowerPoint presentation. We wanted to connect with all of you, many of whom are leading the way, and challenge you to do even more. Today's challenge is a big one. How do we use the circular economy strategies in our daily life? Our panelists will talk about how they're helping develop the circular economy from their distinct point of view, and we hope to engage you with the Q&A. As demand for materials increases, the circular economy is emerging as a sustainable solution to the linear life cycle of materials. In our current economy, we take resources from nature and we make products from them and eventually toss them in the garbage. This is the linear take, make, waste process. In the recycling economy, we capture some of the resources, but if materials aren't designed for reuse and recycling and there aren't adequate reuse and recycling services in your area, many of these resources and the embodied carbon used to manufacture them are lost to disposal. So in the circular economy, we are working to stop waste before it's produced. The circular economy is based on three main principles: eliminating waste and pollution at the source through redesign, recirculating materials for the highest and best use, which is what we'll be talking about most today, and to regenerate nature. We must work together to transform each element of the take, waste system and how we manage resources, how we make and use products, and what we do with the materials afterwards. The circular economy gives us tools to tackle climate change while addressing important social needs. It gives us the power to create meaningful living wage jobs while cutting greenhouse gas emissions, waste, and pollution. So today we'll be talking with two of the players in the circular economy, Reply and Recyclops, who will offer a host of different reuse and recycling programs. Okay, so let's get the conversation started. For those of you just tuning in, my name is Marielle Etienne. I will be serving as the moderator today. I am the Associate Director for Market Transformation and Development Team for the U.S. Green Building Council. And before entering the world of green building, I worked for 20 years in the sustainable materials management field. Having run several of reuse organizations over the years, past president of the Association of the Ohio Recyclers, and I served on the board of the NRC as well. So I'm also the creator of Women in Circularity, perhaps you've seen it, which is a column you can find in Resource Recycling Online magazine. So now for my colleagues here. Gar Punnett is the Chief Impact Officer for Reply. With a BA in Economics and a Master's in Sustainability Solutions, Gar started his professional journey producing content for the Oprah Winfrey Network, but found his calling designing, launching, and building coalitions around innovative circular economic business models. As Chief Impact Officer, Gar is leading Reply's team responsible for marketplace growth, community development, and partnership success that drives social, environmental, and economically profitable systems. So welcome, Gar. Ryan Smith is the founder and CEO of Recyclops, a recycling company that has diverted 1 million pounds per month from landfills. He's also a Forbes 30 Under 30 award recipient, congratulations. And he's the father of 2 little girls who keep life exciting. He graduated from BYU with a business degree. And in his free time, he likes to hike and rock climb and backpack with his family. So welcome, Ryan. Okay, so let me get rid of the PowerPoint for the moment. Okay, let me stop share. Oh, it's not letting me do that. Oh, there we go. Always a glitch. Okay, fantastic. So let's start with some questions. I was hoping that you could take a few minutes to tell us more about your background and how did you find your way to the circular economy? Gar, would you like to start us off?
Sure thing. Yeah, this is my favorite part about our industry that we probably find ourselves in, whether that's sustainability, maybe recycling can get a little more technical, but then circular economy as well, which is it just brings people from different walks of life, and different people almost viscerally respond to these systems. And so I know that is always what Ryan and I have been able to really get along with is just how it makes so much sense. And so for me and my journey, it probably started, I tell this story very rarely, but my journey actually started with my Coke rewards, which was the little bottle cap that you had like a code on it. I was obsessed with getting a Wii on the bottle that was essentially from that program. And basically, because my parents made an agreement with me that the only way I would have a video game system is if I got it through this contest, essentially. So I started learning the recycling schedules of my neighborhood, and I'd be jumping into dumpsters and I'd be going into, rummaging through these bins. Sorry for anybody here who's like, that's illegal. I didn't know at the time. But ultimately, what I just became obsessed with is really understanding how this was working. Why were people paying? Why were people collecting? What were the really economic drivers of this system? And I just became more and more obsessed. I really didn't actually be able to, I couldn't articulate that obsession. I didn't know more about this. It actually didn't even lead me on a path towards recycling until I started to learn more about economics. My academic background is in economics, and I was lacking, frankly, any solutions to the status quo systems that we are finding ourselves in my education, which was I was studying economics post 2007, 8, and 9, where we were really reeling from some very complex economic shortcomings. And for me, it was like, okay, I don't want to go do that necessarily because I don't really know what that system's about. And so basically the production I was doing at the time that was my only way I knew how to change the world, was to try to affect people in what they were watching through television. And so I got to work with an amazing boss and Miss Winfrey. I got to work on some amazing teams, but it wasn't until I moved to Los Angeles where I was like, oh, California thinks a little bit differently. I like what's going on here. There's some different business models. There's some different policy supports. I actually just got obsessed with the business models. And that's what tripped me into circular economy, as I started to better understand sustainability. And sustainability was great. It was all about how do we drive business models that are driving impact, that are supporting local communities, that are wasting less, but also supporting more local work. And it just kept trickling in from there. And that's where I really started to think about, well, what does this mean for our systems and how we're extracting resources and then putting those same resources back in the ground? And that just didn't make sense to me. And so I became more and more obsessed with circular economy. I became more and more obsessed with just how are we going to try to change these systems? And ultimately, too, that's where I met my friend Ryan, is on his journey with Recyclops.
So that's certainly a colorful story. Ryan, can you top it?
Always. I don't know if I can top it. But I grew up recycling. I grew up pretty environmentally conscious. I'm an Eagle Scout. I feel like sustainability was kind of in my blood in some ways from that. I mean, some of the earliest science projects I remember doing, like in elementary school, were on like energy metering and hydroelectricity, and really interested in this space just inherently. But I didn't realize how much I cared until I was in college. I did my freshman year at Brigham Young University, and I recycled. There was recycling on campus. My apartment had recycling. Everything was great. I then took 2 years off from school and went and lived in Russia for a couple of years. And no shocker, Russia doesn't have great recycling. But I didn't expect Russia to have great recycling. And so I didn't think all that much about it. But then I moved back to the United States, went back to school, moved into some off-campus housing, whereas my freshman year I'd been on campus. And off campus, my apartment didn't have recycling. And I remember I bought from a vending machine, like a plastic bottle of, I think it was Sprite, finished drinking it, got back to my apartment and went to go put it in the recycling, and we didn't have a recycling bin. It was my first day in the apartment. It's like, oh, no one's purchased a blue bin. Cool, I'll just go take it straight out to the dumpster. And I cared enough to like not just put it in the trash. But then I got out to the dumpster and there was no recycling. And I just like couldn't reconcile with it. I was like, what? I'm in like an educated college town in the United States of America, and my apartment doesn't have recycling? And so I just thought at first I just moved into just like a dog of an apartment, which was kind of true. But I started looking around other apartments. I'd go on dates, and like before I'd go pick up my date, I'd like poke my head in the dumpster enclosure and be like, is there recycling? And there never was. Did more research and saw that something like 60% of apartments in the US don't have recycling. And that's the start of my journey, was like, wow, there's a problem here. And I felt guilty if I didn't recycle. But it was so hard. Like, it was so inconvenient. I just like didn't know how to do it. And so I, decided to dig in and figure it out. And, as I dug in deeper, I saw that it wasn't just apartments that struggled. I saw that there were full municipalities that didn't have programs. Then if you get to the outskirts of urban centers or into more rural environments, recycling programs, disappear. And that's like 34 million single family homes in the US, huge numbers. You have the 16 million apartments, 34 million single family homes. We're talking like 38% of homes approximately that just like straight up don't have convenient access. Yeah, maybe there's a drop off somewhere. Maybe there's something. Those are being way underutilized, which means, a third of the population doesn't have easy recycling. Like, man, I just felt like that's a problem that needs to be solved. And if not me, then who? If not now, then when? And so I jumped in with 2 feet and went for it.
Perfect segue. So I'd like to know more about your organizations, how they got started, what are some of the key initiatives that you work on within them. So Gar, you want to take a crack at it?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I did not found Reaply. That was all credit goes to our founders who our CEO is Dr. Gary Cooper. But I happened to meet the founders as we were a small company, as I was coming out of my grad school program at Arizona State, where I was studying circular economy. And so what really at the time, what we had started the company around, and very similar to the session that I actually was able to experience before ours, was laboratory waste. And not only laboratory waste around maybe disposables, so you can see plastics, but also research equipment. And so that was really the start of us, was really trying to figure out how do we increase the sharing abilities at research organizations who have not only specialty equipment that often gets used and then sits on a shelf, but how do we actually then also start to share other disposables? So maybe I'm using incorrect terminology, but I hope everyone knows what I'm talking about in terms of disposables, maybe being pipette tips, or even the full maybe pipette containers, or I forget what it's called when they're much larger, but also could be reagents, could be certain chemicals that also are disposable to a certain way in their use, but also their expiration. And so we really started launching these programs. And it was on the success of programs at MIT and University of Chicago and WashU, where we started to see, okay, this is cool. It's also complicated to work with universities. Universities have inherently some structures that aren't conducive to scaling solutions from lab to lab. But we also started to recognize that this problem is maybe a little bit bigger than we realized first. And we started to get really hands-on with talking to different teams at the enterprise level and starting to see, there's lots of waste and there's lots of opportunity at universities, but there's just as much and even maybe more opportunity at the enterprise level with larger construction companies, retail organizations, larger tech companies, of which now we find are the majority of our clients. And so really helping actually those companies take advantage of reuse opportunities and scaling reuse internal, maybe to a large campus, or scaling reuse to maybe a more decentralized set of retailers is all the battle that we're taking on now. And it is really the fun part of connecting these complicated systems.
Very good. Okay, Ryan, so we have a sense of who Reaply's clients are and their services. What about Recyclops? You are muted. It's got to happen at least once.
Exactly. The most common probably phrase said in 2022, you're on mute. So we have one kind of overarching focus, which is sustainability, accessibility, bringing access to sustainability initiatives. And then we kind of break that up into two categories, and that will kind of give you an idea of kind of who we work with and how we do this. And we've been doing this for about a decade now. Year 10 is coming up this summer, so from a 10-year anniversary, which is exciting. But we see two big sustainability access issues. One is a lack of access because of where you live. And that's what I already spoke about a little bit. That's the 34 million single family homes, the 16 million apartment homes that just straight up don't have basic access. That's just looking at basic access. We're not even talking about accessibility of, compost programs or, more complex recycling or reuse programs. And then you have this other side, which is a lack of access because of what the material is. And that is, you have a lack of access where you are and then what the material is. And that's going to be even simple things like glass. You live in Nashville, Tennessee, no glass recycling. You live in, tons of different cities, similar problems. And then you have things like batteries, light bulbs, clothing, plastic bags, where it's like, there's not easy, convenient access for these, or electronics, recycling it for residents. But then we started to see that a lot of businesses have problems or they're passing the problem to the consumer, where it's kind of this like EPR, extended producer responsibility idea, but it's businesses who are kind of ahead of the times and saying, hey, I'm sending a problem to a consumer and I want to help the consumer solve that problem. So some examples, of different clients or different, products that we work with are Imperfect Foods. They have a national packaging return program where they have this bubble wrap insulator that helps keep the food cold. And they have, that's hard to recycle. It's a, LDPE bubble wrap silver lined bag. And then they have ice packs. And what do you do with an ice pack when you're done? Like put it in your freezer? No one needs, 52 of those a year if you're doing consistent grocery delivery. And so they built this national packaging return program where the insulated liners could be recycled and the ice packs could be washed, sanitized, and reused. And we help them build that national program. We also, my favorite program that we do is a dirty diaper composting program. So your average diaper has as much plastic as 2 plastic water bottles, which blows my mind because I've got a couple young kids and we did cloth diapering for a while, and I'm sure some of you are better than me, but we didn't stick with it forever. And you just think about all that's thrown away. Well, there's a bunch of companies that have come out and made plant-based or compostable diapers, but it doesn't make, as I'm sure many of you know, having a compostable diaper does no good if it ends up in a landfill. And so they said, hey, we want to do better than just having a better diaper for a landfill. Let's get that diaper out of the landfill altogether. And they built this national dirty diaper return program. Initially, it was a mail-back program, which has lots of challenges, including having to hold on to diapers for a long time, having to hand that diaper to a FedEx guy and feel guilty and like, oh, hope you don't know what you're picking up. They asked, so we connected with them, and now we do doorstep collection of dirty diapers from, across the country, every major metro, from LA to New York City, we're doing dirty diaper collection from doorsteps. And it's been such an interesting thing. So we touch all sorts of things, solar panels, and working with solar companies for all the recycling that comes and waste that comes from that. So huge spectrum. The diapers go, there's only a handful of composters in the country that can handle both human waste, because it's highly regulated, and can handle industrial compost. Human waste, easy, wastewater treatment plants. But wastewater treatment plants can't handle industrial grade compostable or commercial grade compostable materials. So there's just a handful of processors in the country. And so we aggregate materials and ship them on trucks that are already going to these destinations. We kind of add additional capacity to these, or fill up the additional capacity on these trucks, and send dirty diapers to different. We have a couple facilities across the country.
Very good. Thank you. So, Gar, obviously you're talking to lots of different stakeholders, from the brands themselves to municipalities. How do you work with your stakeholders to convey the triple bottom line benefits, the value add of your services rather than disposal?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I hate to be so linear in that question, which is for us most of the time it's just the bottom line benefit, and everything else is actually just on top. So I think for us it's all about the ROI. So it's the difference of what they're paying us for our service versus the savings that they might have from reuse, and so that's really how we drive the conversation. Everything around reuse is again a huge benefit, and we know that there are additional carbon saving opportunities and different marketing claims and different things that then they can back up to their employees. But ultimately, it's all rooted in the fact that reuse is economically more efficient. And so if we can help a client actually reuse shelving units, reuse ceiling tiles, chairs, tables, et cetera, that are already stored in warehouses, that's going to drive that savings conversation. And ultimately, we think continue to drive more innovation in reuse and recycling and just make the organization more efficient through that, through our program.
Very good. So Ryan, you use a subscription based in some of your programs, so it's a very different model. How do you talk to your stakeholders and clients about the triple bottom line benefits?
Yeah. There's one thing that I learned very early in our business, and this is partially because we were working, directly with apartments and then directly with consumers. And it was, that big question of why. Why does someone sign up? Why is someone, ours is a subscription. People are paying to do this. Generally speaking, they're not saving money. Why are someone doing this? And it's a very simple answer: because they care. That is the answer. That is why our customers work with us. Are there situations where we can save customers money? Yep. Like we have a solar panel client, a solar client who we help them manage all their waste and recycling, and they break even on it, but we do all the work, so they save money. And so it does happen, but we found that people care. And then as we work more with with our direct consumer, residential recycling subscription that we offer in different communities all over the country. And for that, we use the gig economy. We use Uber style drivers to facilitate that, and which has some cool impact when it comes to carbon footprint and whatnot. But there's nothing for them, but they care. Now, from an enterprise client like Diaper or Imperfect Foods, or the diaper company we work with, their name is Diaper, D-Y-P-E-R. Really cool company. Feel free to look them up. Saying their name is so obnoxious because I have to spell it whenever we talk about them. But with those clients, they have found that there is a very real impact that they get by offering this to their customers, and that is in customer acquisition and retention. So I know that Diaper did some studies on this and saw pretty significant impacts on customer retention. That their customer cohort with the highest retention by far was their customer cohort that was actually paying a little bit extra to participate in a collection program. And so they were like, oh, wow, this customer is higher value because it's higher revenue, and higher value because they stick around longer. So
that's pretty cool. That's kind of interesting. I'm going to feed off that thought real quickly, because I think it speaks to almost those externalities that you don't always account for when we're driving a solution. And very similar, I was trying to think of what do we equate on our end, Ryan? And it's to some degree, there's employee retention, maybe, when you see that my organization cares and we're trying to figure things out and we're working in complex systems, but they're offering me a program in which I can actually try to scale reuse in my own life at the workplace. There might be an element of that. I was also just trying to think that, at the core of Reaply's solution, we're trying to drive resiliency. We're trying to drive connected departments. And if we can make more connections across an organization, that's ultimately just going to benefit the infrastructure of that organization, and probably social infrastructure more than anything, which is just, again, continuing to, as organizations naturally scale, departmental silos always grow and there's always communication gaps. And so if we can use reuse as a way to bridge those gaps and drive those efficiencies, that's a huge almost equalizer for employees to say, oh, I actually got these sets of materials from Stacy over in XYZ department. I mean, you just never know what type of connections can be made like that.
Right. You mentioned scalability.
Yes.
And so you recently took on the materials marketplace. I'd love to learn a little bit more about that, what your motivation was for that.
Absolutely, yes. So maybe familiar to this audience, Materials Marketplace has been doing some great work around essentially connecting enterprise, connecting small businesses to materials and resources that are most available in these communities of which these marketplaces were launched. For us, that's huge. We want to be the organization that a company can turn to say, hey, we've got everything from this co-product that we're producing during our manufacturing process to these chairs and office infrastructure. Can you help us find the circularity in those opportunities? And so for us, we want to actually take on the materials marketplace because we saw a real opportunity to say, hey, not only can we then work on the problems of chairs and tables and building materials, but also there's significant output that comes out from enterprise across communities across the US and the world that ultimately we can also try to tackle and try to make more connections in these communities. For us, the materials marketplace was, if we really want to break it down into the tech terms of it, for us, it's all about demand generation. So if we can actually work on scaling a marketplace in which we're helping businesses connect to one another and build an ecosystem, a healthy ecosystem of businesses that are talking and communicating and sharing resources, that makes our lives easier when we come in with a big partner that says, hey, this big partner has a couple tons worth of shelving or a couple tons worth of some sort of material type or good or resource, and we can have a healthy demand channel ready to say, oh, we'd love to take that on and figure out the reuse applications for our community. So it serves in many sort of different ways for us of demand generation, but also building that overall network health.
Yeah, for sure. It's not reuse until you actually reuse it. Otherwise, it's just storage.
Exactly. I mean, that almost kind of goes to what I think before us, Liz Stewart was talking about from her consulting perspective. You got to communicate value and you have to connect supply and demand. At the root of it, that's what it's about, is making sure that the person that has that thing has an audience that's willing to receive that thing. And that's almost the business. At the most simplest level, that's the business that we're in.
Absolutely. I ran New York Waste Match for many years, and it was all about balancing the, generators with the end users.
Exactly.
So Ryan, you've had a lot of experience with acquisition in terms of trying to scale and grow your organization. Can you tell us a little bit about that experience?
Yeah. So, we have a pretty strong specialty to bring recycling to places that have never had it. So rural communities, smaller communities, rural sometimes is a misnomer. You're dealing with communities that just look like suburbia. They're just a little bit further from an urban center. And what we found is, and really how we kind of got into that side and into these is through an acquisition. I was just doing apartments. I was only doing apartment recycling. That was my jam. And then National Sword happened, and recycling rates, or recycling costs, changed drastically. I guess we were also doing apartments, and we started to get into some cardboard, pretty heavy into some cardboard recycling. Cardboard prices disappeared, and suddenly it was like, oh crap, this was a bad direction. And during this time, a family-run business in a small town on the outskirts of kind of the urban center, not far from where I was going to school, Mapleton, Utah, for anyone curious. I had a family-run business reach out and say, hey, our city doesn't have a recycling program. So a decade ago, we started one up, and the kids, they had 3 young boys, and their 3 young boys would go and they earned money for college and life and whatnot. And they ran it like a paper route. They had a Suburban and a trailer, and they drove around, signed up neighbors. The neighbors paid $10 a month. And they were like, hey, the kids all grew up, and mama doesn't want to do recycling pickups every week. Do you have any interest in taking this on? And it was like, this was my first exposure to a city not having recycling. At that point, I'd only seen apartments. It blew my mind. And I very quickly realized, like, this isn't unique. There's no way that this is unique. Just like my apartment wasn't unique, there's no way this is unique. And that's where we started digging into the data that I shared earlier. So we ended up acquiring their little small business. They were doing like $2,000 a month. So very small business. But we saw that they're not alone. There are a lot of these little small mom and pop companies across the country, and there's no exit for them. They start this company and they're locked in for the rest of their life, or they have to take recycling away from the community, which none of them want to do. But they also, life changes, and they're not always in that situation where they can or they want to continue on being the one who does everything. And so we've been have had the opportunity to probably do 6 or 8 acquisitions of companies like this, where we just basically took what they were doing locally and have been able to expand that and really amplify the impact that they were making, while also not having to start from ground zero, which we have loved. Like some of the largest communities we're in, we've doubled the customer size since we got there, but we started with a nice base, and that has been great. So
you're not starting at zero.
Yeah, can I follow up with that one? Yeah, because again, I think that I love what Ryan was digging into from a company growth standpoint, because it's fascinating. I mean, that's such a classic example of something we also experience, which is we keep bumping into problem opportunities where we see like, oh, wait, we had no idea that this was happening. And now it's sort of one of our greatest growth journeys and growth opportunities. And I love that because it's so, I mean, just emblematic of both circular economy and recycling, and the state probably of recycling in our economy, which is just figuring out problems and continuing to, I mean, Ryan, you could correct, like purposefully trip into new problems that and new efficiencies that maybe we can create by, in our cases, bringing technology and trying to streamline some processes, trying to make markets or even open up markets in ways that haven't been done through technology. And so that's really, I think, been kind of the fun for us, is continuing to trip into these problems and think, oh, we were actually just solving this over here. Now we can replicate what we solved over here and double down. And then it just starts to become compounding, and the solutions just start to take on a flywheel motion of themselves.
Absolutely. Crisis equals opportunity. So speaking about that, maybe you can talk about, and Ryan, you could start us off, one significant challenge that hinders that scalability. To reach that circular economy, we have to provide these universal access points and, really have to scale up. So what's your thoughts on a major barrier? Is it transportation? Is it staffing? Is it technology? What are some of the barriers you have?
Yeah. I definitely look at this as like two sides. Like you're either having, for us at least, we either have there's either a technology issue or a staffing issue, in a sense that like, and when I say staffing, I don't actually mean the ability to find people. We actually don't have a problem with that. It's that this is a business that we need to not lose money, right? And so I'm either having to invest in technology or invest in people. Obviously, investing in technology has a longer term benefit. And inevitably, there's lots of people involved in any of this. And in particular, we use the gig economy. We have hundreds of drivers all over the country. But it's easier to work with those drivers with technology than having like a manual dispatcher. Really, what I've seen as the biggest hurdles, though, are, it may sound silly or maybe not, but it's education. Like people just don't know. And like we end up, having to spend so much of our time just trying to get the word out and get and you call it marketing, call it whatever, but it's like there's so much effort. Like I look at recycling rates. I live in a community that has mandated recycling, and you look at recycling rates. Everyone does it. Our communities, we're recycling anywhere from we're recycling with 1% to 20% of households. Like we kind of max out at 25%. And it's like, that's ridiculously low. Like we should be in, at least a third of households, right? Like half, we should be in every household in these communities, but we're not. And there's this education piece in so many of these communities. I like to think about it like a community that's never had recycling. It's like they're starting back in the 80s. It's like you're starting, like there's some education, like, they're broadly, maybe it's a little bit better than it was, but like we really feel like we're having to start from scratch in some of these communities, and like in many of them, we're kind of on our own doing that. It's not like there's some, you know, local organization. There hasn't been any recycling there ever. Like, who's going to go and be the organizations that's promoting recycling that doesn't exist? Like, we become that, and that is hard.
Yeah. Well, we encourage you to connect with NRC and our state recycling organization.
I'm on the board of the state.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, so I'm involved in multiple other states' boards. But still, like, I'm on the board, and we still, like, we focus on where recycling is. It's hard. It's hard.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an age-old problem for sure. So Gar, any thoughts on that?
I mean, all of those, and I couldn't highlight those more thoroughly than Ryan just did on education. I think for us, education probably takes the form out of anything of like breaking down the status quo processes that kind of dominate some of our clients, where it's hard to get change going. It just is. That's the reality of it. But we have a better system. We can put in better process. Often we're battling, and I say this with no malice, but surplus systems and liquidation processes that are very linear. It is, we used this thing and we're going to get rid of this thing. But here's an interesting sort of anecdote on that is, there are some, I'm not going to name any names here, but there are some states that have dictated how certain state programs, whether that's institutionally on academics or maybe even governmental, the programs themselves, the policies, the laws in place require that you actually, kind of check around who can reuse something. There's no process necessarily. There's no technology that can help do that. But ultimately that you must sell it through some sort of program. And that program is tend to be some sort of Craigslist-y type program in which a buyer is able to really capitalize on that and pay pennies, maybe dimes on the dollar for something that the state taxes went into, as opposed to what we really see, which is reuse has so much more value locked away in that. And if we could actually innovate around reuse and connect different departments to one another, connect and really monetize the thing that we've already purchased, that would actually deliver many more savings, that would deliver many more upstream repercussions for that particular environment. On just to then even do one more, and this is our own problem. I talked about a problem we see in the public, but even our own problem, and Ryan, you might feel the same too, and I'd love your opinion, is there are so many opportunities sometimes. It's scope creep that can get in our own way, where we have to remain very focused in terms of what we are looking at, because it's like, oh my gosh, that is a huge problem, but is it our huge problem? And so that's sometimes really hard for us, because even as a growing company, we need to make money. And so to Ryan's point, it's like we need to keep growing, but how we keep growing in the 3 or 4 paths means we should never be taking 8 paths at once. And it's the companies that take 8 paths at once that don't make it. And ultimately we need to stay narrow, and we need to stay focused on the problems we have ahead of us, and then inspire maybe others to take on those other big problems.
I think that's accurate for not only the for-profit sector, nonprofit sector. Everybody feels that.
Exactly. Sure. Yes.
Well, it's just such a big problem. I mean, there is like, the scope creep. It's like, oh my gosh, I see so many things, and I see like, oh, we have the knowledge and the skill. Like, I could solve that. I could solve that. I could solve that. It's like I feel like losing my mind. It's like, oh my gosh. But yeah, it's really reeling in and kind of trying to say like, okay, what am I good at? Let's do that. We can't boil the ocean.
Right. I found when I used to work with large commercial, so say somebody was moving or going out of business or renovating, and they'd have a large, vast inventory of furniture to move, but you knew you had to move that months ago, but we only get a call 24 hours beforehand when it's their immediate problem. So that education piece certainly is very important. So you might not capture it that first time, but then you take that opportunity to educate people. I saw a question about sort of in the same vein in terms of advocacy. So yes, we have to educate consumers, the public, our clients, but we also have to educate the legislators. Are you guys involved in any sort of advocacy at the federal, state level?
Brian,
or municipal?
I know you are.
Yeah, I mean, we work very closely with local municipalities on every level, and so we definitely have involvement there. We are usually looking at, you know, local, like every once in a while there's a, you know, local city code that has something in there that prevents us from being able to operate. We work closely with the city to try and overcome that or find loopholes or whatever. But then also on a broader scale, you know, definitely with my involvement with the Recycling Coalition of Utah and minor involvement with the Recycling Coalition of Colorado, you know, we definitely see a lot more of that kind of on a more state and federal level. And when like we do some, on state and federal level. So through those organizations.
Yeah, my answer on that probably too is pretty simple. And I'd love to actually take on a question that kind of gets to maybe the last one too, if you don't mind. But fairly simple is yes, we're always trying to either when it's talking about reuse of construction surplus or deconstructed materials, trying to be huge advocates for that and trying to put in either our marketplace that can allow that economy almost to flourish and to show the value, or we've been lucky enough to be in some high level conversations on the federal level. I think there was a question even earlier about we've been involved from a GSA perspective, from an EPA perspective, even a DOD perspective, on trying to shape different processes and policies that can go into making those organizations do more with the same amount of resources they have. And so that's been huge. I actually want to take a question to answer this mall question, if you don't mind, because I'm fascinated how that actually pertains into both change and challenges, which is, you know, malls are so interesting for me, where the question I'm referencing here is how do we transform the nationwide network of malls that serve as outlets for extracted materials or to outlets for recovered materials? I'm fascinated by that. What we are consistently looking for places that will take on materials in a storage capacity and be able to sit on them for when they can be used to further some sort of other utility. But as much as I've had an obsession with malls are an interesting use case in terms of almost multiple corporate jurisdiction, where you've got property managers, facilities managers, even the retail locations that may or may not still be there at that mall or whatever it might be. But it's those environments that are not the most conducive to change, because you have singular stakeholders that might have been left off an email that they can pose a barrier. And so it's been fascinating. And wrapped in all of that too is an element of risk and an element of an unknown, that if you're bringing materials that could in any way endanger the structure or the appearance or whatever it might be for that mall, that's what we're going to actually have a little trouble with. I had early conversations with actually some malls in general for using their spaces and providing, frankly, just rent for these types of material drop-offs. And it was almost a non-starter. And so if anybody has any leads, I'm open to them because it's a fascinating idea.
Very good. Brian, anything to add to that?
Can I mention one thing on that as well?
Yeah.
We've one thing that we have done a little bit of, but there's been some challenges and barriers there, but is actually work with some strip malls, so not traditional mall, and putting shipping containers behind those strip malls and using that for storage. And we have a partner who has has several national partners who own strip malls. And we have some, they've been able to give us access to that. And Gar, if you want to talk, we can connect on that.
Brian, we'll talk about that. Yep.
Yeah, we
connecting the dots as we speak.
Live. This is the best part.
There we go. Boom. But yeah, there's definitely, it's such an interesting thing. And we're always thinking about, like, man, if we could have a place, my drivers, we do three things. We pick up, we aggregate, we haul. And that aggregation point sometimes is tough. I end up using a lot of storage units. I end up using, several, different, depending on the community and size and a small warehouse. I just feel like I could do better there. And so always, looking for more options.
So we talked a little about the education and certainly our stakeholders, but have you ever had the chance, and if so, what conversation was that, talking with the brands? Because we said at the beginning, at the top of the thing, we're talking about circular economy redesign, it has to be designed for reuse and recycling before it can be. And I'm sure you see problems day in, day out of how materials are made and not designed for reuse and recycling. So any thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I'll jump on that real quickly. So from our perspective, we deal with a lot of actually higher value items. So I'm sitting in a steel case chair that's probably worth $400. And so automatically this unit right now commands a certain amount of secondary market value. It's not steel case that I'm going to use in this example, just for the record, anybody listening, but we've seen chairs that are of the same quality, of the same value, that again, what these brands care about is data. And they actually lack the secondary market, the post-consumer data to understand how to influence their design process based on what might be happening from a refurbishment or a remanufacturing process. Because a lot of these brands that we maybe are dealing with that are doing tables and chairs and other types of things, they're not connected to those that are in the secondary market and making a living off of refurbishment or remanufacturing from our end. And so when we talk about reuse and we talk about design, it is a data problem. And we actually are starting to work with a lot of these manufacturers to move that, to pipe that data and get that back up into the manufacturing process so that we can avoid, there was a 2005 model chair that we had seen. There were 800 of these chairs, and we couldn't do more with them. We couldn't refurbish them in the same way that we wanted to because the fabric was glued to the chair. It wasn't affixed to the chair mechanically. And so if we were to strip the fabric off and we were trying to refurbish it, it would have potentially really endangered the construction of the chair to such a degree, it would have been almost maybe rendered worthless. And so that's a simple design where that particular model in that year of that chair was glued. And so we probably shouldn't glue things anymore is really almost the learning there. You should screw it in, you should snap it, whatever it is. I know there are better designers out there than me that can figure out how to do that best. But that's really what we should be doing instead of gluing.
Very good. Ryan, anything to add to that in terms of what you're seeing in the marketplace?
Yeah, we used to live in a world where there was the milkman. And I feel like that's all the rage, talking about bringing back the milkman. And I'll just jump right into that and be like, yes, we should. And I look at like so much of like our business and like we're basically built to do residential collection and delivery. And it's like, oh my gosh. Like thinking about this from at one point several years ago now, we had a brief conversation with Coca-Cola about this. And it ended up not going anywhere, unfortunately, but they were asking like, hey, what if we had a Diet Coke subscription? And for them, there was benefit there where it's like, hey, instead of having a customer go to a store and maybe buy, generic, maybe buy Pepsi, maybe buy Coke, we know that they're going to get Coke every week. And suddenly Coca-Cola has recurring revenue, and that is good for Coca-Cola. But also these bottles are getting delivered and picked up circularly and they're getting reused. And it's like, one of the things that I think sometimes people get in this idea that like, oh no, reuse has to be worse for business. No, it doesn't. Reuse can be so much better for business. Like in this, simple scenario, like Coca-Cola can have recurring revenue from a consumer. Like they don't get that. That's not something that Coca-Cola has. And like they could. And so I just think that reuse is, if done right, reuse can be so much better for businesses. And like, that's what they need to look at is like, how do we leverage reuse to make our business better, to make us more attractive?
I love it. Very good. So a quick question about, future opportunities. So is there some sort of future opportunity that you're looking forward to taking advantage of? Is it working with brands? Is it the Inflation Reduction Act and maybe what goes on with that? Is there anything that you're seeing on the horizon that you're excited about?
Yeah, I'm actually going to incorporate another question into this answer, which is sort of about stabilizing supply chains and trying to, again, not maybe necessarily ease inflation. I don't see the direct tie on our end just yet, unless we're just getting items for cheaper. But there is real advantage, I think, into we're in a period now where there's sort of maybe political and globally political uncertainty. And that might be true or untrue, but even the uncertainty still yet prevails. But in those times where we've got maybe inflation, we've got maybe supply chain breakdowns, nothing is more advantageous for us than to figure out the systems within our own border to maximize the utility of the things we already own and the resources we already have. And so for us, that is actually kind of it's not, we don't call it out explicitly in our sales material. We don't ever sort of go that route. But when we go to an organization, we do say, hey, if you're looking to staff up, staff down, it might be worth reuse, because you can actually, you probably have some of these items already ready for a staff up in warehouses, and you don't have to wait specific lead times for new office infrastructure to get built. You probably already own it. And on the same side, or same coin, different side, it's when there is staff down, don't throw all of those items away. You're probably going to staff back up, and you probably have locations where that stuff can exist, and we can help you connect you back to that inventory you already own. And so for us, in times of uncertainty, reuse can be an answer, and we can actually save costs and ultimately still maintain a certain amount of stability in operations and in facilities where that may be kind of more volatile if we keep selling and buying and doing the linear motion as we know it.
That answers one of the questions also in the chat in
Excellent.
terms of, normalizing that inflation.
Yeah.
Ryan, anything to add? What are you looking forward to in terms of some future opportunities?
Yeah, I am, it's so fun because I feel like when I started my business, a decade ago, that we were a little bit early. We were a little bit ahead. And now I feel like it's like, oh, that we weren't, we were early enough that we kind of gotten knowledge and know-how and expertise. And now the world is catching up and people are realizing, oh, this is a big deal. And so I am just excited to, take this to the next level where we go from, doing a million, diverting 1 million pounds a day or a month from the landfill to 1 million pounds a day from the landfill. And facilitating reuse. And as I think about Recyclops, I try and think about it as 3 types of programs: reduce, reuse, and recycle programs. And I feel like we have a lot of recycle programs and relatively few reuse programs. And I am excited to, see a world where it becomes more and more prevalent to, accept reuse, and where we can step in and help companies make that actually happen. So
very good. We just have a few minutes left. I see Jay Bassett, yes, there's a network of building materials reuse centers nationally that could be part of this reuse community-based infrastructure. And so
yeah, I think that's a great call out. I'd love to take that on real quickly. Is as a tech company, we are not looking into following the steps of our predecessors in thinking we have the solution and we're going to Bigfoot other companies that have been doing it so well for so long. I would love nothing more, and it's actually something we're looking into, is as we launch urban center materials marketplace focused types of technology, that we utilize the rebuilding centers that are available in many of these communities and have been doing this great work for some time. What Reaply hopes to bring to that equation, actually, so if there's anyone out there that's listening, is typically those rebuilding centers, those exchange centers, those whatever we want to call them, those reuse centers, they work on a residential / consumer type of environment. What we at Reaply really hope to bring to this is a level of commercial volume as well. And so we would love to partner, love to talk to these types of organizations, because we're going to have mountains of material coming from larger organizations that we hope that we can actually move through some of these centers who know how to process it, who can hold on to it, and can benefit and profit off it with us as we move it on towards more reuse focused outcomes.
Absolutely fantastic. Okay, so 2 quick questions. I do want to give a shout out to Hawaii, who has a reuse focused EPR legislation. That's phenomenal. Yes. Thank you for sharing that. So really quickly, so to I have two questions, one pragmatic, one optimistic. So getting involved in the circular economy can be kind of daunting for some people. You know, obviously there's some stalwarts that have been around forever, but there's some new people that are just getting into this field. Do you have any tips on, or, you know, how they can get more involved?
Yes, reach out to me. I've listed my LinkedIn. Check out our podcast. Is also fun to share with people, to get the conversation going even sometimes, because that leads me into my last point, which is ask questions, poke around, don't take no for an answer, and just keep asking why. Why does the system exist the way that it is when we're losing money, or we're wasting materials, or we're not diverting as much as we can? Sometimes it's as complicated as contracts that you can't break for a certain amount of years, but there are ways around those, and you can divert materials, and you often have more power than maybe you think you do to divert materials. So keep asking why, and keep learning.
Very good. Ryan?
Yeah, I think for me, it is that simple effort of trying. Like, I think that if we try, and if we, that our little impact, I listened to a podcast a while ago that spoke about this idea of like, hey, can I make a difference as an individual? And the short answer was no, you can't. But the long answer was what I appreciated, which was you can, because you are more than just an individual. You're a network, that when you do something, you influence other people to do something, and then they influence other people, and it has network effect. And anything that you do, there are network effects. When your neighbor sees that you're recycling, they're more likely to recycle. And when they see that you're reusing, when you go out to eat with friends and you bring your reusable utensils or whatever, they're going to notice that. And you have an influence on people, and so that's where I look at, like, yeah, maybe like my individual piece of paper that I'm putting in the recycling bin isn't moving the needle, but my impact is much larger than that single piece of paper.
I couldn't agree more with that, Ryan. And then we become the reuse people in our friend group of now we get every single question that anyone ever has about any material. It's like, you know the answer, don't you? And it's like, I mean, I kind of, maybe, I don't know. So yeah, that's what we become.
I haven't worked directly in the reuse field for many years, and I still get those questions.
Yes,
so,
exactly.
So I do want to call out that right after this is going to be BYOB for Party Track. Always fun. Be sure to join us at 4 o'clock. Okay, for our last question. So some blue skies visioning. In your opinion, what is the one thing that, whether it's a policy, incentive, some other lever, that would help you make major strides in the circular economy, either as a society or your company, whatever the case might be? But what's one thing that you think will really move the needle, as they say?
I'll go first. I've got bottle bills. I just cannot fathom why they're not everywhere. I know there's reasons. I know there are, but they're not good. None of the reasons are good. They're all lame reasons. You look at recycling rates for things like aluminum cans, which are just infinite. They're so recyclable. And you look at recycling rates in states like Utah, or any state that doesn't have a bottle bill.
Illinois.
And abysmal. You look at states where they have bottle bills, and it's fantastic, generally speaking. To me, it's just such a no-brainer. I can't fathom why we haven't done more of it. So
exactly, I'm with you there. On our end, it's probably actually to some degree, Ryan, that same thing, which is how do you build intrinsic value into those materials and those commodities? So whether that's carbon related in terms of maybe some sort of carbon related tax or incentive, something related to the actual value of the material, so that on the back end, on the secondary market, on whatever it is where it's being recaptured, it has almost, again, reclaim value built in. So I'm with you on that. And maybe that's carbon, maybe that's something else, but I'm with you there. And it's been so great to be here. So I think on our end, just building in that value.
Yeah, fantastic. And thank you for joining us today. I'm sorry I froze for a second. So I I just wanted to thank the NRC board for hosting this session. I wanted to thank Gar and Ryan for contributing to this thought-provoking discussion. Thank you to all the attendees for their amazing questions. And this is just beginning. Keep the conversation going. Reach out to Gar and Ryan and let us know if you have any further questions. Thank you very much.
We'd love to connect. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye.